I created 2 exercises to help you practice all that you've learned in this chapter. So out of working with objects, the most crucial techniques I would say is learning how to combine shapes and also how to group and organize them in layers. In this first one, you have 5 artboards, and each artboard shows you what you need to do. I prepared the shapes for you, and that's what you need to work on here on the left side. But then you also have the references here in the middle and on the right. So you can see how the final shape is formed out of the original circles. And then on the right, you see the actual final design. Don't forget, you need to select these shapes and then use the Shape Builder tool. Now, if you prefer to use the Pathfinder, you can as well, but you will have to probably use it in combination with the Shape Builder. In this case, for example, what you can do is to hold down the Alt or Option key, paint over the areas you don't need, and then you can either hold down Shift key and draw along all the remaining elements, or you can then go to Pathfinder and choose Unite. And don't forget, you can also click in the middle and then it should automatically apply the color that you currently have selected. But of course, you can change that later as well. As long as the shape is selected, you can switch between these colors that I prepared here. Of course, the further down you go, the more complex the designs will be, like this Vodafone logo, the Batman logo, this fish, and then also the Twitter logo. Interestingly, this logo is made of only of perfect circles, while in the other designs I might have used ellipses and even squares. Feel free to go through these exercises several times if you want, and you can even try to recreate them by just using the ellipse tool and build your own designs, or even try to replicate the designs I've done here. Apart from combining shapes, I would like you to also practice grouping and organizing objects. And for that, I prepared this exercise where you will have one layer where all the objects are placed at the moment and they are completely not organized, so you have a big mess here. Although the illustration itself looks good, it doesn't mean that the actual layers panel is in a good state. And why is that so important? Well, just as an example, if I wanted to select this compass and maybe make it smaller or move it somewhere else, it's almost impossible to do that because as soon as I try to make selections, everything gets messed up. Even if I make selections from the outside, you can see the grid and the background and all kinds of things are moving around. So the task here is, again, to work in an organized way and start with setting up some layers. So for example, you can create 2 additional layers. One we can call background, and then one we can call continents. Now, if I select these 2 parts here, the water and the grid, that can already be moved onto the background layer. Here's another way of moving these elements quickly onto the background layer, which by the way, I'm going to put at the bottom. And also continents can go below the start here layer. So instead of moving them by cutting and pasting, you can also drag that little icon here in the layers panel, which represents the selection, and drag it onto the background layer. Now just to see what we moved, I can deselect everything else, and we can easily see that whatever I wanted to place there is now on a separate layer, and we can even lock it now. To put the continents there, I can just select them, and because it's one object, it's fairly simple to just drag and drop it onto that layer, which again, I can lock. Then for these shading rectangles that I have here, I'm going to create another layer on top of everything else, and I'm just going to call it shading. And I place this above the original layer, and then again I just drag and drop these selected items there. Once again I can lock that, and we can see without and with those elements. Now that these are separated, it's much easier to make selections. For example, the compass, now I can just make a big selection around it, and as you can see, it's easy to move around. If you want, you can put this on a separate layer or just simply group it. So when I show you here in the layers panel, all the elements that makes up the compass is here, but I am going to press Command G or Control G, and now it becomes a group, which I can even rename. The same way I would be able to select a pin like that and group it together again and call it pin. The same way now I can select the plane, group it together and call it plane. Same way I select the ship, group it together, and the balloon, group it together. Here's another pin, let's group that. There's another pin there, group, and one more there on the left, group. Now you see I didn't name all of them, but it's already much more organized than before. And maybe one last thing is that I would move these lines onto a separate layer as well. So the roots, I'm going to create a layer for that, roots, and simply drag and drop them. The easiest way to do that is to close the layer, drag and drop the selected items onto that new layer. Now I can even just rename the start here and call it elements. So all in all, we have 5 layers and it's much more organized than before. We have our shading on top, then the roots, then the elements, then the continents, and then the background. You can see by dragging over these eye icons, you can also quickly toggle them and turn them back on instead of clicking on them one by one. Same applies for locking as well. You can just click and drag over them to turn them quickly on and off. So this is what I would like you to also practice and really get used to how to select objects, group them together, and also how to create layers and move objects from a layer to another. Once you feel comfortable with the techniques you need to use here in these 2 exercises, you can move on to our next topic, which is going to be the chapter about the appearance of objects.